So the topic of today's discussion, of course, is at the core of the European Union functioning. And as I was preparing this speech, I remembered a question that the citizens asked me a few months ago. But why do we need fiscal rules? Why can't we just do what we've always done in the past? And it was not an easy question to answer at the beginning, so I gave the usual answer because, we are in a monetary union and we need to make sure that every country does not make choices that could have negative impact on the others and so forth. But later I thought about my answer, and maybe a more honest answer would have been a different one, and would be to say we need fiscal rules because the economic and monetary union, it's still incomplete. It's still built in a certain way where we have a common currency, but we don't have a federal government, and where fiscal sovereignty is still fully with member states' governments. So we need to find a way to coordinate and try to find ways to make this union to grow and prosper, even though we don't have the full instruments at the European level. But anyway, I'll get back to this later. The existing economic governance is the product of the cultural and political climate that was prevailing in the 80s and the 90s, when we had a full confidence in the self-regulative capacity of the markets that was unlimited, and also we believed that monetary policy was the universal panacea for the residual stabilization purposes. So you see what the markets can do, and then the ECB will provide for the rest. There was not big debate on the role of fiscal policies, not a lot of trust in what fiscal policies could do. And the subsequent 3 decades actually have been characterized by profound economic, social, and political changes that were related to the 3 global crises that we have faced. The global financial crisis and the 2008-9 Great Recession, the COVID-19 pandemic, and more recently, the war in Ukraine, and now, unfortunately, another war not too far away from here. The Great Recession was the first serious stress test, I would say, for the economic and monetary union. In those months, the whole world discovered that monetary policy alone was not enough. With interest rates close to or even below zero and the economy showing symptoms of secular stagnation, fiscal policies came back to the forefront and reassessed as a necessary and indeed powerful tool to trigger recovery and ensure it is stable and sustainability over time. However, it seems to me that we did not learn enough from that lesson, and I remember, for example, at the very beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, at the very beginning, the EU fiscal response was very hesitant. And again, at the very beginning, it was the ECB which intervened and provided an extraordinary quantitative easing plans. National governments and the Commission decided to temporarily suspend budgetary rules, but it became increasingly clear that leaving the capacity for health, economic and social response to each single member state's fiscal space would rapidly increase the risk of a collective catastrophe. So we started lengthy intergovernmental negotiations that brought us to the draw-up of a large-scale European fiscal plan, the well-known Next Generation EU, whose purpose was to supplement monetary policy encompassing significant innovative elements, such as raising financial resources via the issue of European Union bonds, and then also we complemented with other European tools, like SURE, like the SURE Fund, to support employment schemes in the member states to make sure that employers and citizens wouldn't be too affected. And in less than 2 years, most of the European countries had gone back to almost to pre-crisis GDP level. Then the war in Ukraine confirmed once again how monetary and fiscal policies should be used jointly. Where inflation initially reflected sectoral imbalances associated, for instance, with the prolonged energy shock, the coordination of monetary, fiscal, structural policy, energy market reforms became necessary to ensure that inflation pressures did not start a wage price spiral, but at the same time we were able to protect the most vulnerable from the impact of high inflation and the economic recession. Now, the debate over the economic governance is ongoing for long, and the analysis of the European crisis and the stagnation that we've experienced in the last decade have shifted the judgment pendulum in the direction of a growing anachronism of the existing fiscal rules and the unfeasibility of the restoration of the pre-pandemic status quo and pre-pandemic lessons. So let's try to see what are the main lessons. I think that 3 lessons from the last decade could be useful in today's debate. The first lesson is that an entirely, exclusively fixed rule-based approach is not very effective, because fixed rules are statics and cannot be updated quickly when unforeseen circumstances arise. What did we do? We activated the escape clause. No rules. Is this the right response? I don't think this is the right response. Rules that apply only when you have a good weather end up producing uncertainty, because people do not know what will happen if something bad takes place. So this will be destabilizing expectations. You don't know what to expect in case of crisis. The second lesson is that drawing up rules that are capable of taking into account all potential future events is impossible. Nobody could have foreseen the pandemic, or they didn't even foresee the war in Ukraine. Increasing the number of contingencies to the rule quickly leads to highly complex rules which are difficult to apply and actually also easier to manipulate and even circumvent. So this is exactly the reason why democratic constitutions, for example, are a system of more general principle rather than very detailed and specific rules. Then translating principle into rules of contingent contact, of course, is an illegal process that in turn follows applicative rules and measures which necessarily leave a controlled discretion margin. So I know it's always very difficult to talk about discretionary, but the discretionary element sometimes is a necessary evil when you have incomplete contracts, as we say in economics. And the purpose of constitutions and the economic governance goes along the same lines, should be to regulate these discretionary margins, to make them clear, to make them transparent so everybody can see what is going on, but not to pretend to remove it entirely, because that's not possible. So if we do not provide for clear margins for some flexibility, but with clarity and transparency of what is happening, what we will do is simply to push the discretion behind the curtains of opaque and arbitrary bargaining behind the curtains where, in the end, politics returns to the fore, inevitably. So the third lesson is that delegating fiscal policy entirely to individual member states that are constrained only by a set of rules which ignore macroeconomic externalities is no longer possible. The era of do your homework alone is over. Individual member states' budgetary policies must be more effectively controlled, but at the same time coordinated and harmonized to maintain a balanced euro area fiscal stance in order to minimize negative spillovers from individual budgetary policies onto other member states. So the legislative proposal put forward the last April by the Commission seems to me to move in the right direction. There are many positive elements, and I thank Mr. Balassone to have illustrated all of them very clearly. I will just briefly focus on two which I believe are particularly important. The first is that now with this proposal, the focus has shifted from annual budget to medium-term public debt sustainability assessment. And the latter is a more comprehensive framework within which the current state of public finance and its future evolution can be determined. So it will make possible to accommodate ex-ante desirable allowances rather than picky them in ex-post negotiations, and could potentially amend the anti-investment bias that are embedded in the current economic governance and that every economist have already always told us. And the second thing I would like to highlight is that the medium-term public debt sustainability assessment and the debt reduction path, because of course we need to go through a debt reduction because it's a fragility, but this will be, it is in the proposal of the Commission, country-specific. What does it mean? So it means that by eliminating this reference to fixed targets that are valid for all without any distinction, we can really address the cause of the problems, go at the roots of the problem that every country has. And so this will allow to better assess the future evolution of debt, taking into account the specific features of each member state with reference to growth, population dynamics, interest rates, trend, but also current and future budgetary policies. So let me also stress that while conducted at the single member state level, the debt sustainability analysis should also need to pay attention to the cross-country spillovers and the resulting aggregate fiscal stance of the Union as a whole, which is something that we are still not fully capable of doing. Debt sustainability risk should be balanced against the cost of adjustments in terms of production, with the explicit goal of averting a debt crisis for the individual member state and the European Monetary Union as a whole. I just want to conclude with one thought, because at the beginning of my speech I referred to the big changes that characterized the last decade. And in my view, the main lesson for the monetary union is not only that fiscal rules need to be amended, but also that the new rules must also be complemented by a system of safeguards that are designed to protect the monetary union's integrity in event of systemic shocks. It is interesting how the Commission's public consultation itself reveals how the vast majority of stakeholders underline the importance of these aspects. And it is relevant that even the ECB, the European Central Bank, had stressed this need in its opinion to the Commission package. Safeguarding the economic and monetary union is a task that cannot be delegated entirely to the European Central Bank, but must be a commitment of the union as a whole. If next generation EU, and in particular instruments like SURE, which I mentioned earlier, were to become permanent union tools, for example, nationally budgetary constraints might immediately gain political ownership and be easier to control, because a significant part of the macroeconomic stabilization task would be entrusted to the central fiscal capacity. Mario Draghi wrote also an interesting article about that recently. If the political will for this tool is not there yet, and we know that it's very difficult, I know the political situation, but I'm afraid if we don't get there, the new rules, in order to be credible and able to work also with unfair weather conditions, we will need again to include enough flexibility and adjustments. If we do not have the courage to accept this element as an essential part of our future governance, our efforts in recent weeks risk becoming useless. I don't want to be pessimistic. We are all fighting and working very hard to give the union the best possible rules, but I'm afraid it's a long journey we will have to go through. Thank you very much.